Good morning. It's always a privilege to be in this pulpit. I've had that privilege a few times, but this time I'm a little nervous, which is uncharacteristic, because this is the first time my wife has been in the congregation. I've generally been substituting for her when she couldn't be here. And she has assured me that she will not holler out in the middle of my message either corrections or directions. And I'm going to see if she can really hold to that. We're going to find out. In any event, I'd like to begin my message this morning by putting on my glasses so I can read. I'd like to begin my message this morning with a well-known short saying. I'm sure it's familiar to all of you. Its origin is lost somewhere in the haze of history, but that doesn't matter. What counts is the profound insight it provides, fear and hope, both of which permeate today's passage that you just heard at read from Ephesians. Mindful of this, I would ask that you focus on these wise words. A wet bird never flies at night. Let me repeat that, just so you have it clearly in your mind. A wet bird never flies at night. I think you will agree that whoever wrote Ephesians, and most scholars, by the way, don't necessarily think it's Paul, but that's another sermon and another time. But whoever wrote it would have done well to put this profound observation in the letter. Were it then surely some astute Bible scholar would have related it to the famous short poem that Emily Dickson wrote back in 1862, which, like all of her poems, uses its first line as its title. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land, and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. Now, Emily Dickinson loved birds, and here she uses an extended metaphor for hope. Not just hope, but undaunted hope. A hope that perseveres no matter what. A nice thought, but unfortunately, not always the case. And that's where our wet bird comes in. How many of us have had fears, especially these days? You don't have to raise your hand, but how many of us have had fears? I mean, real fears, the kind of overwhelming fears that causes us to sweat. Medical experts and psychologists say sweating is one of the most common manifestations of fear. And they add, night is a prime time for this sweating to occur, either when we're awake and have an opportunity to focus on our fears, or when we're asleep and the fears were suppressed during the day burst into our dreams. So sometimes we're not even aware. And sometimes we are because we've woken up and we're covered with sweat. Again, I won't ask for hands, but I'm sure some of you have experienced that. Another poet, the 16th century mystic St. John of the Cross, gave us the term we often use to describe this state. Even though he was speaking of something else, it's become synonymous with this state. It's called the dark night of the soul. The same soul where the thing with feathers, the bird of hope, perches. Laden down with fear, we're unable to hear the voice of the bird, to take heart from its song. Perhaps if it left its perch and called to us from outside, giving us proof that we're not alone, we might hear it. But the bird of hope, having been soaked by the sweat and yes, even the tears of our fears, remains imprisoned in the dark of our soul, unable to fly, drenched into the night and give us comfort. Now, this is one wet bird that doesn't fly at night. If it did, it would be buffeted by the winds of war waged in the darkness. Ephesians 6 describes. Up until this point, Ephesians reads like the instruction manual for Gentile converts to Christianity, which it was. It's exactly what it was, sort of a mixture of Emily Post, Miss Manners, Dr. Spock, and country club rules, covering proper ways to perform prescribed duties and responsibilities, all in the cause of living a virtuous life on earth to ensure an everlasting life in heaven. Ephesians was Calvin's favorite book. I don't think it's hard to see why. Chapter 6 is also an instruction manual of a different sort, devoted to the strategy, the tactics, and most importantly, the trappings of battle, which would enable Christian would-be warriors to combat and conquer the forces of evil unleashed by Satan and his soldiers. Now, understand, this was deadly serious business. Demons and devils were very real entities for those living 2,000 years ago. Malevolent beings capable of launching both external and internal attacks on the unwary. Malicious creatures, greatly to be feared. That is, unless you were clad head to foot in the armor of God, which would render you invincible. What a protective array it is, this armor of God. As you heard that read, it's got the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. Better equipped than even a Roman soldier with all the regalia that makes you invincible, except when it doesn't. Keeping to Paul's imagery, that's because you're not facing a human enemy, but rather any number of unholy entities, skilled at sneaking rather than dashing through your armor, seeking the one thing that will give them control over you, a thing with feathers, hope. For they know that without hope, you're not as good as dead. You're better. They're still around you, though. Demons, devils, well, now pretty much of our own making. But no less dangerous. They're ready to attack us and steal our hope at the right time. Like now. These times. These very, very trying times. And why is hope the target? Because hope's the basis for faith. Faith is hope enriched. Hope and faith are so close they appear inseparable. You see, and think about this, there can be hope without faith, but there can't be faith without hope. For those seeking faith, hope gives rise to it. However, you don't have to seek faith to have hope. In fact, you can deny faith entirely and still lead a happy, productive, moral life, grounded only in hope. Now, as Christians, that's not the life we necessarily choose to live. Jürgen Moltmann, one of the greatest theologians of this or any century, and one who you've heard my wife mention many times, says, in the Christian life, faith has priority, but hope the primacy. Faith has the priority, but hope the primacy. He goes on to say that without hope, faith falls to pieces, becomes a faint-hearted and ultimately dead faith. And there it is, simple and direct. In trying times such as this, faith is often weakened, but remains standing. It only collapses when we abandon hope. Sounds like something that guy Dante said was printed over the passageway to hell. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. How true, as some of us know from experience, without hope, life is hell. Unfortunately, hope's got a bad reputation in some quarters. It's seen as a way to escape from reality, with hopelessness often offered as a true picture of reality. But as sport and life, a leading character in George Gershwin's operatic masterpiece, Porgy and Bess, cautions us, it ain't necessarily so. Though cloaked with claims of being realistic, hopelessness gives a false picture of reality. At least for Christians, it's hope that's anchored to reality. Hope is, as one commentator astutely observed, the Christian lens for perceiving reality. Moltmann says hope alone is to be called realistic because it alone takes seriously the possibilities with which all reality is fraught. Indeed, Moltmann bases his entire theology on hope, and that's spread out to many of his disciples and his students, one of whom was past professor of theology at Yale, which is one reason that she's sort of a Moltmann student once removed because of that. Indeed, Moltmann equates Christianity with hope, saying that as such, hope is forward-looking and forward-moving, and therefore also revolutionizing and transforming the present. In other words, more than merely a feeling or a noble quality of the heart, hope must embrace and transform our thoughts and our actions, both with respect to ourselves and to society. Hope is both individual and collective, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that the togetherness of church or congregation can cultivate hope. Religious writer Barbara Johnson tells of an elderly woman who in times of fear and stress would turn to Psalm 91, verse 4. Don't go studying the Bible, I'm going to give you that little portion goes, he will cover you with feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. One night, this woman was walking down a dark street, came aware of being followed by two men who obviously planned to murder her. Realizing this, she began to shout at the top of her lungs, "I'm covered with feathers! I'm covered with feathers!" On hearing this, one of the men said to the other, "Whoa, this lady's crazy, let's get out of here!" And they fled. Which brings us back to that wet bird that doesn't fly at night. So maybe it won't come when we call to it. Maybe we have to go out into that night, that terrifying dark night of our soul, though we're soaked in sweat and in tears. Go out by going in and search for it. And the search may take a while, but its worth isn't measured in time. For once we find this feathered thing, we'll find the armor we really need to protect us against devils and demons. Hope.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and around me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, he shines in all that's fair, in the rustling grass I hear him pass, and he speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world, oh let me never forget, that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is my ruler yet. This is my Father's world, the battle is not done, Jesus who died will be satisfied, and earth and heaven be one. This is my Father's world.
I send you forth, burdened, I hope, with the armor of God, which is your love, basically. We have a new program for this fall in the United Church of Christ called Rooted in Love. Rooted in love, like those trees that were by the water that I just mentioned in the blessing. And that's where our faith is rooted always. Not in anger, not in righteousness, but in love and acceptance and compassion for the way other people are suffering right now. So with that, I send you forth. May God bless you and keep you all this week. May God guide your feet to those who need you. And may those that you need find their way to you at the moment that you need the encouragement and hope and the wet bird that flies at night. Amen.